But anyway, we're off and running. We are back for another Mountain Fitness podcast with Hunt Hike Harvest. I am once again joined by Chief of Staff, Head Honcho, Education Extraordinaire, Mike Barnes.
Coach, how are you?
I'm frazzled. I'm in between training sessions. We had some technical difficulties with cameras, so we had to audible a little bit. And but we're just going to run with it. So it'll all work out. But appreciate you joining me again. Excited for another episode. If you haven't been playing along thus far, this is episode number 4 of our Mountain Fitness pot. No, episode 5. I think 5 now.
Nice.
Yeah. We just released episode 4 where we talked about conditioning, metabolic stuff. How are we conditioning? Why are we doing things that we're doing? What should we be doing? That type of thing. If you haven't been watching our podcast, go back, check out some of the first episodes. We've started to dig into things about like seasonal training. How do we approach things in the weight room? We talked about some mobility stuff. And today we're going to kind of expand a little bit on our programming and talk a little bit more in depth about strength and how should we kind of plan and get into some general stuff. And then how do we make it a little bit more specific down the road as we get closer to season, and all the little variables that kind of flow into that, which there's not necessarily a right way and a wrong way, I would say, but I definitely think there's some better ways. And I think that's kind of what we're going to tackle. So let's start. I'm going to kind of lob a softball into you to kick things off. And we talked about this a little bit offline. What do you see as some of the pitfalls, especially as we look at kind of where people are getting information, how they're choosing things that maybe they're doing in their training, and how some of that stuff can either be problematic, maybe it doesn't necessarily fit what they need, how maybe it's not an effective strategy. Start with that one. We'll get a can of worms in your court right away.
Yeah. Well, what I am observing is a couple things. Is even with my clients who follow a lot of fitness kind of online experts, is that there seems to be the most of the information that they're running into are small 15-second clips of here's how I do a workout. I've whatever, on a grease board. And here's the exercise of the day. And here's how I develop shoulder strength. And here's the quick fix for back, shoulder, knee, orthopedic pain. And it's like, it just doesn't, they're trying to get likes is what it is, obviously, in followers, but it's just not that easy. And if or they don't know what they're doing. So, yeah, I kind of follow people with a lot of followers just to kind of like, okay, what are they? What's actually going on? And I bumped into this one trainer. She's at a commercial gym. Everyone knows the name. It's a national chain gym. And she grabs a couple pieces of equipment and she's in a, little aerobics type workout outfit. She looks great. She looks fit.
Of course.
And she does 2 exercises for her shoulders and boom. There you go. 15 seconds later, this is how I did it. She gives a double bicep flex and says, see you tomorrow type thing. I'm like, wait, what?
Hit that like button.
Right. Hit like and follow. That's as easy as that. So actually what I did, Joel, is I was like, well, is this all really she's doing here? Because this is like circa 1987. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And, I don't think there's any true professional qualifications there. So anyhow, there's that. And I think in the hunting space too, you've got some people that are trying to scream over the top of each other, or else this is how your shoulders should be developed. Here's some of the nuance to that. This is what you need to do for hiking. This is what we do for whatever, butterfly push-ups or pull-ups or whatever. So anyhow, it fits in this little 15-second clip, and it's a little infuriating. And I've gone so far as to say publicly, not only is that irresponsible, you could be held liable for if someone comes down on you and be like, well, if you're going to profess yourself to be an expert, and this is misinformation to the point of, boy, I tried it, but I didn't take any of the precautions.
Right.
And then I'm going to cut myself off. Is the rehab stuff is getting a little bit out of control too. Here's how
Yeah.
you fix shoulder pain. Look, okay, maybe that worked for one individual, but this needs to be diagnosed, not here's how you fix shoulder pain. Here's how you fix
Yeah.
back pain, knee pain, ankle pain. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough one, especially from, where we sit, and you're kind of in a catch-22, right? Where we understand that you have to sometimes, in order, especially when you look at how you continue to try and convey a message, educate people, whatever else, grow a brand. Obviously we're talking about, our brand, and trying to get more people to understand what we do and how we do things and why we do stuff. And it becomes this like necessary evil. And you really, realistically, you toe a line of like, what kind of information should I share? How do I try to convey it or portray it? And, I think my question that I would say that goes back to you, because, I can say, well, I've probably posted, various things. We have, some different things on our YouTube page in terms of, our side hill
Sure.
series, and some of our things to improve rucking capabilities and structural integrity and some of those things. And I go, all right, well, yes, I agree. How, in your mind, then, do you kind of look at it and say, well, if we're going to go out and put this in the public eye, right? How do we
Right.
qualify some of these things? Number one, which I think that's really important, right? Because as a professional, you should say, if you're, insert exercise X, whatever that is, or a series of exercises, right? And to your point, right? I just was looking through some stuff the other day and saw a physical therapist who had like 250,000 followers, and there's just a litany of exercises that are on their page. And I'm like, okay. And I looked at some of them, like I was looking for something specific. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But the next portion of that is there has to be a qualifier to that, right? And to your point, if you are going to, put that out there, that's all good and well. But the overarching part of that is those are oftentimes blanketed by saying like that's good for anyone, right?
Right.
And that's the hard part, is understanding who is this fit for. In a physical therapy or a rehab setting, that should never be before or precede an eval, and understanding like if someone has shoulder pain or something else, like understanding like what is it that we actually need to address, right? Because we get, like you said, a lot of times just stuff that gets thrown on the wall, and you go, all right, well, that's got to work, right? And so my question to you would be like, what in your mind then is where that line kind of changes, and you say, okay, if we're going to put things out there, and yes, we have done that and whatever else, how do you think is the best way, or maybe in your mind, to convey that in a way that as the end user looks at it, they can actually create some line of separation there to say, all right, well, I watched that, but that's not for me, or maybe that's not appropriate for me. Like how do you think that can be done so that
Well,
message gets across?
to what you just kind of implied was you need to qualify this. This is a piece of an overall program, and let's call that overall program the puzzle.
Right.
And this piece of puzzle may be appropriate for you. I do this for core stability, shoulder stability, whatever, hamstring strength, you name it. But it just, if you can't get that 15-second attention span, like it just kind of, here's a shoulder routine, 2 exercises, thanks, flex, see you tomorrow.
Right.
Whoa. So you can see the difference between what we're speaking to, and I guess we share that frustration,
Yeah.
because we know a lot goes into, hey, you might do an exercise a few times and that's it. That's all I want to do. I just want to do that exercise a few times. I'm
Right.
trying to get a response, make an adaptation, and then I move on. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's these exercises, they're treated as, this is the silver bullet type
Yeah.
thing. And
Well,
clearly we know that's not the case.
right. And I think that for me, like to take that a step further is what typically doesn't happen is the follow-up to that, right? Which is
Right.
as you're qualifying it and you say, hey, if you are someone who is needing to improve whatever quality, right? We're trying to improve posterior chain strength or whatever, right? Maybe rotator cuff, what have you,
Yep.
say that this is who this is for, right? If you're looking for this, right? Which
Good point.
automatically either qualifies someone to say like, that's not for me, or yes, I need that help, or good to know, right? Which is totally
Yeah.
fine too, right? And then
Yeah.
the flip side of that is if you just go out and say, hey, do this, bop, 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 here's your exercise, and go, sweet, see you next time.
Boom.
You
And
didn't, you
you
didn't
haven't even
fall
talked about any of the sets and reps and
exactly,
the frequencies and volume and
exactly,
exercises that may precede it
yeah,
or exercises that may go afterwards or where it fits in an overall program. It's not one exercise and done, but I think that's the way the consumer is looking at it. And
yeah.
a lot of times I think that's the way the online expert wants to be portrayed.
Right. So, and that was exactly my point is like, in order to responsibly put that forth, whatever that looks like, that becomes where the nuance within where these things become applicable, useful, effective, what
Right.
have you, right? Is to say, hey, this should be done in 3 sets of 10 or 4 sets of 6 or whatever. And
Right.
intensity here should be at 60%, or you can use an RPE and say like a 6 out of 10 or whatever.
Yep.
Right. And if you are going to work your way into this, this is how you should progress this. Right. So this like kind of fits right into what we want to talk about tonight, which is, the really focusing on the strength portion. And we talked in our previous podcast, if you go back to episode 1, I believe, we talked a lot about kind of like how the foundation of the program looks from a year-round perspective, right? Which is we get done. For us, we typically talked about that from whenever your last hunt of the year is, and starting kind of that cycle over, which is now I'm looking towards, for us, it's 2024, right? Which seems like an eternity, but I'm like, oh, it's almost December. And guess what? We're just about into that portion of the year where it seems a long ways away until you train for a couple months. And now you're going, it's not that far away. So what,
Yeah.
so if you haven't watched that podcast, I would tell you, go back, watch episode 1. And we talk a lot about all of that stuff, which is the framework. Today, we want to talk a little bit about, all right, you understand the framework a little bit, and we'll add some context to that. But let's begin with strength and look at it from the postseason period. What are, for you, where some of those variables begin to sit, and then what do you inject in terms of maybe some exercise selection with that strength work, as we look at that kind of beginning of postseason period?
Well, the assessment and evaluation is absolutely critical. So if you want to, if someone is a really strength power athlete or individual, I should say, that they don't have to, that's not going to be their issue as far as Western and mountain hunting. Um, we don't really need to focus on that as much. But if what you're suggesting, and I think we're talking the same lingo, is okay, this person needs to build some strength up. Let's just call it whole body strength for that matter. I look at the fundamentals first: push, pull, squat, and some type of rotation through the torso. That's kind of like covers it. So even to the
100%.
point of upper body, lower body, midsection. And we want to be able to connect those 3 links, and one shouldn't overpower the other. So a balance between upper body, lower body, and a midsection to help transfer those forces from a lower to upper body.
Yeah.
There's typically 5 or 6 basic fundamental exercises, some type of a hinge, some type of a squat, some type of a lunge, maybe some type of a power movement, overhead press, some type of press in the, say the bench press manner, and some type of a pull or pull variation there. And of course, the midsection too. So I
Yeah.
think that kind of, I don't care who you are. If you're a strength conditioning coach, you're going to probably fall within those categories. You might have exercises that you favor. or even methodologies that you favor, but it's going to be a push, pull, squat, lunge variation in midsection.
Mm-hmm.
Joel, what do you think?
No, I agree entirely. And usually when I start kind of talking about this, especially like when we're teaching courses, tactical, other, performance-based coaches, things like that, is I really harp on people to get away from thinking about training muscles and train movements. Like think more about like training movements. And so to your point where you say push, pull, hinge, right? We usually say push, pull, hinge, single leg. And then we look at upper body and we say we're going to have upper body push and upper body pull. And that's either going to be horizontal or vertical. Right.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and, and so when I think about that, it's like I start to lay the foundation in where it's like Monday may be focused on lower body push with upper body pulling. And Tuesday may be focused on upper body pushing with lower body pulling. And we find this kind of like yin and yang effect where we're kind of crisscrossing these
yep,
qualities. And within that, then it's like a drop down menu, right? What are my upper body pulling exercises? What are my lower body pulling exercises? What are my upper body pushing? What's my lower body pushing? And in that early part of, kind of the postseason, it's looking at that and saying like, a lot of what I'm going to do is going to be bilateral, meaning 2 foot, 2 arm, right?
yep,
Major movers. We're going to look at squatting. We're going to look at deadlifting. We're going to look at, pressing, whether that be shoulder pressing, overhead, bench press variations, those types of things, pull ups, inverted rows, those types of things. And to me, a lot of that is going to be bilateral in nature. How am I doing?
great. No, that's exactly what I would do too. And the reason why I would do that bilateral stuff is if you look at the force output and the volume per exercise, per set, per rep, it's higher. It's just higher.
Yeah.
So the cute stuff kind of comes, okay, now I want to do a single arm dumbbell press. You're not going to be able to handle the same weight. So is it going to go from 100-pound dumbbells down to 85-pound dumbbells or 80? Yeah, perhaps with the same set rep range, but I want to overload that muscle to the highest level it can get.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of, where we typically start. When we look at intensities, volumes, and things like that, right? For me, I'll let you kind of follow up with this. It's going to be relatively standard, right? We're going to start at 3 sets of 10 to 12 type in that
Yeah,
neighborhood, which obviously means in terms of intensity or like the amount of load that we're going to put on a bar, dumbbell, whatever else is going to be moderate, right, to light, depending upon kind of what our training status is. Working in 60% range, maybe a touch more than that, depending upon who we are and where we're at in terms of our current training status. And rest breaks, typically we're going to probably be 60, 90 seconds, somewhere in that neighborhood, where our goal is to it's like to get some volume in, right? And we're going to kind of, I always
right.
say, like touch a little bit of everything. And we want to start to kind of create a need for what we call minimal essential strain, right? Which is I need to get above that threshold of where kind of my like baseline is to create some neuromuscular need to adapt and start getting some training that's going to help me start progressing. And that's, kind of where we're headed downrange. We start thinking a little bit further down to, 2-3 months from now.
So let me just kind of follow up that a little bit. That is number one, your drop down menus are the same ones that I have. They get the exact same progressions, bilateral movements, single sided to follow. And initially with that 3x10, you also have, you might choose 2, 3, 4 exercises per body area. Yeah.
Right.
In that shorter rest interval. And let me just add though, too, if you're going to work up, let's just say for the sake of argument, work up to a 10 RM on a squat, you're going to probably take 2 to 3 minutes break because of the amount of muscle mass used and the amount of energy it takes for that particular exercises. You can do a bicep curl because it's so small and the volume's so low. no more than 45 seconds to a minute. And,
Right.
we as coaches try to get the most amount of work in the least amount of time, but no less that we're not compromising the quality of the movements.
Right.
Agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think,
Yeah.
and, as you kind of said that too, I mean, what's your thoughts? Cause I know this is really common, right? We see it in the CrossFit world. We see it in a lot of our group classes and some of these things. I've got plenty of people that are like, oh yeah, I go and do Orange Theory. I do this, I do that. Right. What's your thoughts on in this? Maybe just shooting off just a little bit. I don't want to try and get down a rabbit hole, but circuits. And if you use circuits, when do you use them? How do you use them? Why do you use them? Because
Yeah, now's a great time. Now's a great time of year to do that. If you want to do some circuits, matter of fact, that metabolic conditioning book that myself and John Graham, it just got released a couple of weeks ago. But that is the type of workout that would complement this type of year, this type of time of year, I should say. I like
right,
them. I like to incorporate them. I think people initially think that, oh, this is going to be a circuit workout with dumbbells, and they're remarkably challenging. If you're going to start in, just start in easy. There's all sorts of these group exercise classes, and the commercial gyms are now putting aside rooms that have that specific metabolic training type of
right.
studio. I like it. There's some subtleties though to it, as you know,
Yeah.
where the order of exercises need to be sequenced thoughtfully, because you can get yourself into, well, what just happened?
Hmm.
Well, you hammered your shoulders hard enough. Now you can't lift them, and you're going to ask the participants to do a minute of push-ups. Well, they don't have the shoulders to do it
Yeah.
anymore, so it's
Right.
a little demoralizing, and there's some overwork there as well. I like the circuits, and I think as far as the CrossFit and some of these other kind of capacity type workouts, they may have their place, but what it typically does, and Joel, we've spoke about this, is that it kind of they blow by the assessment and evaluation and individual needs and says,
Yeah.
okay, everyone's doing this type of workout today, and that's just not a CrossFit scenario. There's plenty
Right.
of gyms out there that are doing the same thing, and
Right.
they accommodate the best they can, but I mean,
Yeah.
as well as I do, for crying out loud, you've got an athlete or an individual that has incredible upper body strength and no lower body, and vice versa, or else no torso strength. And if they
Right.
don't work on that, they'll continue to kind of have that deficiency.
For sure. I think I like circuits, like you said, very very similarly. I think that in that postseason period, it's a great way to, like you said, kind of build up some of that capacity to get some work in. One of the things I know we talk about a lot, like we teach an entire section in our tactical strength conditioning course that we operate, and we talk about circuits specifically in structure. And what happens so often, and you mentioned this, right, is not putting a logical order into things, where people just look, people like to take circuits and
Yeah,
like, let's just draw out of the hat, right? Like
it's crazy.
one of my pet peeves, this drives me freaking insane, is the people that are like, oh, let's do the deck of cards thing, right? And I'm like, that is the most randomized garbage that someone freaking put together, and they go, oh, this is super cool. Like, yeah, like you do 5 push-ups and 8 burpees and whatever. And I'm like, there is no
Right.
rhyme or reason to any of that crap. If
Yeah.
you just want to do hard,
Yeah.
meaningless stuff. And to my point is, I always tell people, like, you can't do things mindlessly and expect meaningful results. Just plain
100%.
plain and simple, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I do like circuits, but if you go back to what we just previously talked about, where I say upper body push, lower body pull, lower body push, upper body pull, a lot of times as
Right.
we start to structure a workout, we're going to put them in there in that order, right? So if we're going to try and get a full body workout into a circuit format, we're going to kind of crisscross those variables and add rotation that you talked about, right? But if we have people that are just starting back into these things, and maybe they're not, up to snuff yet, And we're like, oh boy, they can't do 30 seconds on and 30 seconds off, which
Yeah.
happens to be apparently the universal circuit timing system.
There you go.
Right. I'm like,
Fits right in every time.
hey, I got a great idea. We just had a mobility podcast we talked about. Guess what you could do for 30 seconds with a 30-second break? You could foam roll. You could do hip
Right.
mobility. You could allow a
Yeah.
section in your circuit that allows you to recover a little bit, still do something that's useful to you. And it doesn't
Yeah.
always have to be that you just like go throw the hammer down as hard as we can
Right.
for 45
Right.
minutes straight, and then you end up doing potentially more harm than good, or you overshoot people and technique falls apart and those types of things. And I'm just like, yeah, you can see like my blood starts boiling when I talk about this.
Yeah. It's, it's interesting too, Joel, is I've done that tactical course too. And you kind of serve them up that template and say, okay, we're going to do jumping jacks for 30 seconds, rest for 30 seconds, body weight squats for 30 seconds, rest for 30 seconds, dumbbell rows for 30 seconds. And okay, you did squats, rows, and jumping jacks. How long do you plan on doing these kind of high metabolic type movements? Because you're going to nosedive real soon. To your point of it's time to incorporate some mobility or an exercise that you can kind of recover
Yeah.
truly. So
Yeah.
I understand exactly what your frustration is, and it's a thing for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So anyhow, outside of that, kind of like pulling us back on the rails here, I
Yeah.
also will use circuits a little bit sometimes to kind of like break up. We get into 4 to 6 weeks of pretty kind of like focused work, and every now and then I kind of like to occasionally throw a circuit in there to kind of break up the monotony, change the tempo and pace of things a little bit, just
Right.
as some variety.
Yeah.
I tell
Yeah.
people all the time, like, if you walk in on Monday morning and your body says, it's International Bench Day, guess what? The odds of you continuing to progress or adapt at a higher level isn't going to be very good. And
Yeah.
so I'm a huge believer in a lot of changing of how we deliver some of that pushing and pulling and rotating exercises based on changing implements, right?
Yep.
Changing angles, those types of things, so that we're going to constantly force the body to have to either propriocept a little bit differently, have better
Yeah.
control, just those types of things. So anyway, I
I do
digress.
the
But
exact same thing. I do the exact same thing, Joel. I mean, I generally know the direction I want to go. And it
right,
might be I want to do this exact exercise with these reps and these intensities and these rest intervals, or it could be like I just want to push. Somehow I'm going to do some type of pushing today,
for
and
sure.
we can use cables, we can use some type of push up variation, we can use a barbell, or we can use dumbbells. I got
Yeah,
plenty of options here,
yeah, for sure.
and it keeps it interesting.
Right. Yeah, and that's a big thing too. I get bored, right? Like I can't stand coming in and having to think that I'm just going to do the same Monday workout the next Monday, and the only thing that's going
Uh,
to change is I'm going to go from 3 sets of 10 to 4 sets of 8, but I'm still doing the same
right,
movement week in and week out. Like it's a
right.
sanity tester for me, and it's worked pretty well. But so anyway, so we've kind of went through that postseason just a little bit. We talked a little bit about some exercises, a little bit about structure, how we kind of like put some of those things together. We're talking bilateral. We're talking putting him, into major movers and those types of things. When in your mind, as we start thinking more off season, and off season meaning as we start heading into say January and January through March-ish, that type kind of period, when do you kind of start like tweaking things, and how do things evolve for you from a strength perspective with those same variables, right? How do we start progressing and adding our little bit of, salt and pepper on that?
Yeah, I would start to work on volume and intensity, maybe not at exactly the same time, but just to kind of, if you're going to build up for 3 weeks and then back down a little bit, maybe 20%, and then your next step is to build up the next 3 weeks and then back down, and then 3 more weeks and back down. So you've got 3 4 week blocks. I would probably use that. Let's just call January, February, and March. And if you have a strength deficit, whatever, let's just call it full body. If that's something to work on, that's when I would start dialing it up. And at 1, 2, 3, and you can see as it kind of steps up over those 3 months, I'm going to get some targeted strength in there for sure. Push, pull, squat, add muscle volume, cross sectional area. I think people get compelled to think that, well, I've got to do specific strength movements. And you forgot there can be some benefit to just hypertrophic morphological adaptations. I'm just trying to get bigger. And those workouts are fun. And you might have what we call an undulating periodization, where a high volume day is followed by a low volume day with higher intensities. So you get this stepping effect over the course of the month, and then you start stacking those months on top. That is one approach.
Right.
I think that's probably the most commonly used these days. I don't want to call it pragmatic at this point, but it's getting to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're kind of paying attention to what Mike said right there, and again, a lot of times we continue to allude to or make light of things that we see within the industry, stuff that gets pushed out there, whatever else. And I was going to make a joke and kind of, you mean you just can't just keep going harder and harder and harder and harder
I
and
just keep
harder?
trying harder and it works, and then until it doesn't.
Right. And so what Mike was talking about there is scheduled and planned build and recover periods as you go through. It is not feasible physiologically, structurally, whatever you want to call it, that your body is just going to continue getting better, right? And I think we've all met people, your gym rats that are so stuck on like, I got to get my bench to, 320, right? I've got to get my squat to 400, whatever. And they're insistent on squatting at 370 and 380 day in and day out and that type of thing. And they don't understand that in order to potentially get to that point, sometimes we have to squat at 300. Sometimes we have to squat at 320. Sometimes we need to be at higher reps. Sometimes we need to be at lower reps. And all these things kind of like you're massaging these things to get to a specific point, and it's not a linear, just straight line to get there. And that is just, unfortunately, that's how the body works. And we see people that get really stuck in thinking that the only way to get there is to continue to go harder, to go heavier, to just keep adding. And what Mike just talked about is there has to be a build and an opportunity for us to realize some of those qualities to actually grow, and then we can go back, and then we give time to recover and grow and go back, and that is just, unfortunately, as they say, that's science.
Yeah. But to your point there too, it's like when you say go back, it's not go back and let's continue to focus on the bench press or squat. We might go back and I'm just trying to build up some pressing strength or else some leg strength. And there's all sorts of different ways to get there. And then I hate to even use this word because we've heard of progressions. And then someone said, what about regressions? Oh, okay.
Right.
You just mean like back off a little bit? Yeah, regress. We got to have regressions. Ugh, how cutesy is that term? It bothers me. So whatever. It is a planned pullback to recover from fatigue or the accumulation of fatigue. And biologically, you can do that up to about 3 weeks, and then you back off. And that's kind of how the science works according to our biochemists.
Right. No, 100%. And that's the thing too, is I hope that people understand our mission as we kind of go through these things is to convey objectivity, right? There are things within what we know from a scientific foundations perspective that has been researched for literally decades, right? That
Yeah.
we have gone through protocols of all these things of, why do you do 3 sets of 10? And why do you do 4 sets of 8? And why should you balance this, pushing and pulling? And how do you strategically put all these variables in place? I'd love to say that I invented some of this stuff, but I haven't invented a single thing. I have simply studied and researched stuff
Yeah.
that we know to be true, that has been tested in labs, that's been, everything down to taking blood work and muscle biopsies and force plates and, EMG readings and all of these things that you and I for years have said, this is how I'm going to guide what we do, when we do, and how we do stuff, as
Right.
opposed to saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to that 15-second thing and go, yeah, that looks cool, I'll do that.
Get out the deck of cards. Right.
Exactly. Right. Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
to that point, though, what I will say is, I don't want anybody to listen to this and be like, oh, so you're just telling me like I should never look at anything on Instagram or YouTube. And
No.
I always say no, because I literally just admitted to looking at some stuff online, and you have to have a Bruce Lee approach to these things, which is understand what it is you are looking for, why you're wanting to find or look for something, right? And use that which is useful and know the things that are not going to be, right? And
Right.
so if you can't answer that question, and this is one I say to young coaches all the time, if someone comes in or are working with a specific individual or group or whatever, and someone goes, hey, why are we doing that? And you can't answer why, you better really evaluate why it's in your program in the first place.
100% for sure. To your point though, too, Joel, it's as we look at the science, and we've done it for decades now, it's been curated. We know that there are parameters and guiding principles of exercise that we use specifically in strength power development. And why? It's because it's been studied, and it's been vetted, and there's meta-analysis on it. We just don't use, hey, there's a cool study that just came out of wherever that says, it's like, dude, you got to give me 10 studies and a meta-analysis, and now you've got my attention. Not one study that showed this to be effective. In matter of fact, I was going back and forth on, Stu McGill did a presentation, and someone, not a presentation, he did some research, and they looked at, what we're asking is the EMG of the rectus abdominis different from upper, mid, and lower? And I said, well, I think there is, because if you look at the neural anatomy, that's where those nerves innervate. And if someone has a spinal cord injury, they can activate all those areas above that spinal cord injury. And they're like, yeah, but what about Stuart McGill stuff? And I was like, no, that's exactly what I'm going to say. It showed that the EMG activity was the same for all the way through the rectus abdominis. I'm not saying it's different. I'm saying that your application is not in line with neural anatomy. It showed what it showed, but if you take it down to that nerve is innervating the upper abdominal area or rectus, that's what it innervates. That's what it can do. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I think there was a little confusion between how that particular study was applied.
Yeah.
And the person that was touting this online was, I think, maybe a little, I don't know. The application of the science just wasn't there, and it was one
Yeah.
study. Give me a meta-analysis on that with 20 or 30 studies, and okay, now we have some conclusions, and that's where you and I like to operate.
Yeah. No, most definitely. So as we kind of go through, we're talking about getting into that January to say March period. Sets and reps, how are you modifying those? How are you
I'm
modifying
ve-
exercises?
I'm varying a lot of variation in there. Um, if it's going to be on strength, and let's just say that that's going to be the major theme for those 3 months. Someone that has some type of training background, apparently healthy, no orthopedic issues or anything else, I would probably say I'm going to operate between there's some research out there that shows this, and it's starting to build, which is kind of fun on that hypertrophy. And I'm trying to, build up some tolerance as well. I'd probably say between 8 to 12 sets per body region, three, 3 or 4 good targeted exercises. And I would probably keep one holdover and maybe twice a week per that area.
Yeah.
Interestingly, if you wanted to go a higher volume on, let's just, body region, just let's say shoulders, I'm going to go 20 sets of exercises, I don't know, whatever, 3 sets per exercise, and I'm going to build myself up, say 18 to 20. You need longer time to recover. And I think what has been suggested is that if you can train, just say cut that volume in half, say we're going to do 9 or 10 sets twice a week as opposed to 18 to 20 once, the results are about equivocal.
Yeah. And
Isn't that wild?
yeah,
I
there's some really interesting stuff about that. Like I've even read some things that talk about the neurological kind of component, and that they have seen that the nervous system activity, there's an actual upregulation in nervous system activity at around set 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So are you suggesting that's like a potentiation type?
right, that they're
Right.
seeing an increase almost in output, whether that is force, whether that is, even from a perspective of like exhaustion and those types of things that
Mm-hmm.
um, most people, they're doing their standard 3 sets, and some are doing 5. And then, you have
Right.
your power lifters and those types of guys that love your 5 sets of 5 and those types of things. Right. And they're saying like, keep extending that even a little bit further. And I know a lot of
Right.
what you're talking about is coming from, a colleague of ours, Brad Schonefeld, who in a lot of regards, Brad's probably done more research on
Yeah.
hypertrophy and muscle growth than anybody, for a guy who's 5'5" and wants to be a big guy, which is hilarious. No offense, Brad, if you're watching this. Um, I can say that, and I like to give him crap about it, but you know, I'll include some of those links in this for sure, kind of talking, giving you some access to some of those things. But yeah, I mean, I think as you think about where you start at the beginning of the training season and that post kind of season point, now you're trying to build up some density, right? And as you
Yeah.
start thinking about transitioning into that pre-season period, now we're talking about spring and into, late summer and those types of things. You're going to have to start thinking a lot more on the side of conditioning and building up a lot of endurance and some of that stuff that we really need. And so a lot of times, I know for me, for example, like I know I lose weight every summer, right? Not because I'm cared about going to the beach or whatever else. It's like I'm going to put on a lot more miles and I'm going to put in a lot more time,
Mm-hmm.
where guess what? It's probably good for me during this time of year to think about like putting on 5, 8, maybe 10
Right.
pounds or something like that in terms of lean muscle is going to be helpful to me, because if I go into the spring super light and I continue to lose weight, now I'm actually potentially having a negative effect on overall body strength, right?
Yeah.
We talk about things in terms of structural integrity and rucking and some of that stuff that we're going to need to prepare for. So kind of to your point, right? Like I like that approach and saying like, I need to build up a little bit in these winter months. Guys love to say that's bulking season, right?
Yeah. That's an excuse to overeat a lot,
Yeah,
though,
exactly.
as well. Yeah. It's kind of
Right
fun.
on.
I mean,
Hey, right. But in this context, I'm talking about like, hey, let's actually think about, let's put a little bit more on the chassis, because the next phase, which we're going to talk about, is where we start to really think a little bit more specialized, right? Preseason time, we talk about spring and into summer. We're going to start kind of splitting hairs a little bit on exercise selection. We're going to start getting a little bit more potentially specific with some of that stuff. We're going
right.
to talk about building up a higher capacity to handle higher amounts of workload, cardiovascular as well as muscularly, and those types of things. So how do you start transitioning your way from, that kind of or off season period into, let's say, spring and summer?
Right. So kind of let me back up. So January, February, March, we're going to do some type of foundational strength, um, muscle development, muscle hypertrophy work. We're on the
Right.
same page there. And to your point, I guess to back up even, so if you wanted to do some circuits, maybe you throw that in with a lot of variety, a couple days a week in January. Okay, that's totally fine. Now we're starting to move into January, March, April. Is that what you're talking about here?
Usually.
You know what? I, me, I get ahead of myself all the time. So when someone says April to me, I'm thinking I should probably do this in June, but man, I want to get my backpack on. I
Right.
want to get some boots on the ground and see what's going on. And I like to get out in the mountains a little bit, and things are a little slushy here in Colorado that time of year.
Yeah.
But I just have a tendency personally to want to do that type of stuff. I would go with a day pack kind of light, to tell you the truth. It's probably a little bit early, but maybe some more of the hunting specific areas, hiking, quads, hamstrings, ankles, calves, hip,
Yeah.
core stability. And I wrecked my rotator cuff, bicep tendon, rebuilt cuff a couple times. So I never take any time off of kind of that rotator cuff, scapular stability type movement. That's always going to be part. But if I know someone wants to pull a heavier bow back, um, I'm going to make sure the shoulder is, specifically the cuff and the scapular stabilizers, are ready to go. And I would probably
Yeah.
start to phase in that direction. And not for nothing, I like to shoot most of the year. But once the stuff starts melting down out here, I'm over on the range. I want to start getting some reps in
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, right? Is that they kind of go hand in hand, right? You
Yep.
you hear people talk about like, oh, you got to be shooting, every day. You need to be shooting 4 times a week, blah, 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 whatever, right? And it's
Mm.
like, that's great if you can. I know for me, based on travel schedule, work demands, everything else I got going on, just doesn't happen. I'd love to,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't. So as I get closer to this time of year, talking April, May, June, whatever, I know my shooting volume is going to go up immensely, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. But how much better are you going to get if you practice all the way through the winter in whatever? You can put them on a softball at 40 yards. I'm I'm not I hope within about a month I'm shooting 3 out of 4 arrows on a softball at 40 yards. I hope, under very static conditions.
right,
I'm saying I don't need to get much tighter than that within my range.
right, for
Is
sure.
that something that you think about? It's like, well, okay, now I
Yeah,
can put them on a baseball or a softball. I'm still in the kill zone at 40 yards.
yeah,
If I shoot starting in April, or else I shoot through the winter, it doesn't matter to me
yeah.
personally.
I mean, me personally, what I find a lot of times is, and this probably sounds counterintuitive, but I'm like, when I shoot routinely and I shoot, say, 20, 30, up to 50 arrows at a time, I find that a lot of times I tend to start tinkering and I start trying to figure out like
Yeah,
why did that arrow go there and whatever else. And a lot of times for me,
yeah,
like if I take a break and come back where I don't get too far down the road of like, is it this? Is it this? Is it, is it
right.
this and that type of stuff, that usually if I take breaks and pick my bow back up, it's kind of like, all right, let's settle back into things. And I find that a lot of times I'm a little bit better
Yep,
um,
yep.
just because I don't get myself so wrapped up in just
Yeah.
nuance after nuance after nuance and overthinking things
Right.
and whatever. And that's just how my brain operates. I know there's lots of people who are like, man, I got to shoot and I got to shoot and I got to shoot. And I'm like you. For me, we always say like a paper plate, right? Like I want to be on a paper
Yeah.
plate. And I know
Yeah.
that I'm,
That's
you know what? If we go to tack, you've been to tack with me. Guess what? I'm not scoring and outscoring everybody and 12 ringing things all day long, right? Like I don't even have that mentality. Yes, it would be nice. Yes, maybe at times I should shoot more, whatever. But yeah, I think that's just the way I operate. So when we think about some of the things, like you mentioned, right? You start getting antsy to start getting out, getting the pack on. I think that in that early springtime, it's great, right? Start
yeah.
start just kind of getting out and getting moving, but there is a price to pay, right? You mentioned your feet, ankles, lower leg, hips, all these
Yeah.
things, right? So this is where we talk about kind of specializing things just a little bit, where we're going to start now maybe evolving a little bit from all that like simply bilateral pushing, especially lower body wise. And I'm going to start focusing a little bit more on single leg lunge patterns, step
Yep.
ups, crossover step ups, angular lunging, those types of things. And as we've talked about in previous podcasts, right? Like I may start introducing things with the foot a little bit on
Yeah.
some uneven surfaces, because if I go out and I'm going to start getting out in the woods a little bit, start just getting antsy to be out there, which is fine. I never tell people like, no, you shouldn't be out there doing that right now. Guess what? Then the foot and ankle and all those structures are going to start getting some stress on them.
Yeah.
And if we
Yeah.
can find ways that starts to get supported or bolstered a little bit within what we're doing in the weight room, it's going to help as we start getting the ground starts drying out. We go, like you said, we go through mud season. And now I'm like, hey, I'm going to go out and put in a solid day. I'm going to go out for 4 hours or 5 hours and put on a 6, 8, 10 mile hike or something like that. Um, you know, the stuff that we do in that early spring and things like that may help me feel a little bit better if I'm going to go out and put that kind of mileage on in the early season.
So let me ask you a question. When I think that we're going to start up about the same time, and when you, as an example, um, back, hips, core, legs,
Yeah.
where do you find your targeted strength training? I need more specificity. Where?
For me, it's going to be a lot in that springtime. I will kind of have a little bit of a middle admittance here that I do a lot of stuff just based on my own personal kind of abnormalities, you could call them, pathologies, right? I have a hip labrum issue. I have a ton of pathology in my lumbar spine. I have matching shoulders that aren't very good. I've got a C6 pinched nerve and hopefully not a herniation that I'm dealing with right now. And I've lost about 50% of my grip strength in this hand over the
Not good.
last 3 weeks. So I just saw a
Not
specialist
good.
today. So, not looking for sympathy, but what I'm saying is I've got a lot of workarounds, and
Mm-hmm.
they require me to be pretty honest about my hip mobility. They
Yeah.
require me to be really pretty solid in terms of focusing on trunk integrity, those types of things. I
Yeah.
have to, the guys give me crap around here all the time. Like that, what? Hey, that doesn't count, because I demo stuff all day long in training when I'm working with athletes and things like that, where I'm like, hey, we're gonna do face pulls, and I'm like, I'm just gonna rip out about 6 to 8 of these right now, real quick.
Yeah.
And I'll
Yeah.
kind of like throw in a couple extra cues, and I'm like, hey, we're gonna do this bottoms up press over here, and I'll get about 8 of those in, right? And so by the end of the day, I'm like, I might have got 100 reps in on, a little bit of
Yeah.
this and a little bit of that, because I know that I have to, because if I stray too far from some of that stuff,
Yeah.
I suffer. And so my goal is, as I kind of approach this to get to your question, is that those are little like bits and pieces for me that have become really critical, because I know as I start really trying to ramp it up,
Yeah.
I'm going to run into problems if I'm like waiting
Yeah.
to be like, oh, this would be a good time to start thinking about trunk integrity. And I'm like, guess what? I do a lot of stuff day in and day out. I lug bags through airports year round. And, like even something as benign as that has been problematic for me if I stray too far away from like taking care of myself with some of these
Yeah.
like smaller things.
So what you're saying, Joel, are some of these exercises are wouldn't be foundational other than the fact that you do have multiple areas that you need to address year round,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that otherwise they're going to manifest themselves into way bigger problems,
Right.
say in the middle of summer,
Yeah.
if you didn't do that, and then you decided to, okay, let me throw on a 40-pound pack and go hammer six today.
Exactly.
It will be a problem. That's not even a question.
For
Okay.
sure. And so,
Okay.
if there's something that I would say to that is like, it has created a very high level of awareness for me personally about this, right? Like how I
Yep.
feel. And it doesn't take much for me to be like, ooh, yeah, what's going on there? Like bumps, bruise, aches, pains, little things where, if I sit too long, if I'm at a desk too much, I got to get up, I go downstairs, I get on a roller, I put on a breath belt, I do, all these different things to kind of like work on kind of resetting the system and those types of things. Because yeah, once we start getting closer to that springtime, we just rolled out our 2024 schedule for Western Hunt Fest. We're going to have 5 of those, right? I put on
Yeah.
6, 7, 8 miles a day at those events, tracking competitors and those types of things. And then during the week, I'm going out and doing other training. And it's like, man, I really actually tried to track my mileage last year, cumulative mileage, right? And, I was over 100 miles by the time, we even got into actual hunting season. So,
Awesome. I love it.
yeah, and so it's good. I mean, but like you said, so for me, it's more of like continuous scheduled maintenance with those types of things. I think that there's small bits and pieces of that stuff, especially when you talk about rotationally, right? I'm a huge believer. Gosh, we just do so much. It's reaching, grabbing, grasping, flexing, rotating, that I think gets overlooked. I'm so glad that you said that because to me, it's like I do a presentation on rotational training and it's just like the title of it was like the world's rotating. Why aren't you? Like, I mean, you have to be constantly rotating. How many times
Hmm.
you talk to somebody, you're like, my back's jacked up. Like, what'd you do? And you're like, I reached down to pick up the groceries, and you're like,
Yep.
holy crap. Right. Well, you want
Yep.
to, train to have a pack on for 6, 8, 10, 12 days with 40, 50 pounds in it. And your back's getting, thrown out from stuff like that. You have to understand like the value and how these things play into it. And as you progress through these specific times a year, guess what? When we're getting to now what we're talking about this time of year, and we need to start ramping up the intensity a little bit, ramping up the volume a little bit, our rest periods and that type of stuff is going to start kind of going down a little bit. You're going to fall apart real quick.
Yeah.
And so to
It's
me, I think that,
humiliating though, too, Joel. I mean,
oh
when you start to fall apart like that, you're like, that's not what I had planned. I didn't think I could. I didn't. I thought I could handle that. And when things go sideways,
yeah,
especially when you're on the mountain, it is really. I mean, it's demoralizing,
yeah,
and you don't. You're like, well, I can't go to that canyon. Why? Because I'm out of gas, man. My
yeah,
back is killing me. My hip flexors, my shoulder,
yeah,
whatever it is, it's
yeah,
it's not where you want to be mentally. I know
yeah.
that for sure.
I talked about that. I was on the Hunt Lift Eat podcast with Luke, the owner of Hunt Lift Eat, and him and I talked about that, which is like, man, if you're going to go out with a buddy, if you're going to go out with a group or whatever else, like the last thing you want to be, and even though like there's a lot of
Yeah,
internalizing it, personally, is like last thing you want to be is a liability,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
we talked about that on a previous podcast. I know you brought up a story about a buddy of yours where you're like, oh boy, we things could get sideways real quick. And so I
yeah,
think for me personally, like I've taken a real kind of stance with that, which is like when I think about those types of things and the training that we're talking about, how do we plan, how do we start thinking ahead to, everyone goes like, oh look, hashtag is it September yet, type thing. And it's like, well, guess what, that stuff comes at a price,
yeah,
because when I get there, there's no cramming for a test. Sorry, brother. If you didn't
yeah,
put in the work, your rate limiting step has already been established, right? And you can say like, I'm tough, like fuck it, whatever. And I'm like, that still only has a cap to it that's going to allow you to
Yeah,
actually do so much, right? And to
great
me,
point.
that's where I'm always just like, I'm not the guy who's going to be like, how many miles do you do? I'm not that guy either. But guess
Right,
what? I never want to be in a position where I'm like, I just can't do anymore, or
right.
I can't get to there. Oh, the elk are over there. I'm gassed. Nah.
Yeah, can't do it. Can't get back. Getting over there's not the problem. I got to get back.
Right. And
That's
so
kind of what you process as well.
yeah, I think there's responsibility in that, right? Personally, right? As an individual, there's responsibility to the animals, right? Like, don't put yourself in a bad
Yeah,
position that you take a bad shot that you shouldn't ethically
yeah,
take based on being too fatigued and tired, or knocking down an animal and being like, oh, now what am I going to do? I've watched
right,
forums. We watch forums all the time, like, and I'm always just kind of amazed at it. Number one, it's guys just pissing on each other in every direction, but the amount of times someone has went on there and been like, hey, does anybody know a good pack out service? I downed an elk, and I'm like, well, I get it. Like, trust me, we've all lost animals, or at least most of us have, right? Where things just didn't go right. Shot wasn't quite where it's at, and I don't want to get into arguments about like, oh, like, that's because you should shoot more and all this other crap. But like, stuff happens. I saw a video the other day about a guy like marking the distance of how much a deer ducked a shot,
Oh,
right?
I saw that. I saw that
Yeah,
clip. That
really
was
interesting
crazy.
stuff, right? Like, stuff
Yeah,
happens, right? We're in a really chaotic environment, but I'm like, if you're that guy who's like, oh, I went 6, 7 miles deep and then I knocked down that elk and I'm like, I can't get it out. Like, sorry, brother, that's a poor choice, right?
yeah,
And I don't know, you can leave comments in there and tell me I'm wrong, but to me, like, if I get to that point, and unless I've got horses back at camp or something like that I'm going to go back and get them out with, if I got to that point and I got to that shot, and before I took that shot, I said, man, this is not a good idea. And then you come out and go, oh, I'll just go find someone else to do it. Like, I don't know. I
no,
just, that
no,
grinds my gears a little bit.
yeah. Hey, Joel, I wanted to ask you though. So some of those more hunting specific exercises.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got my little go-to list. What's on your list? Let's
I'll,
cross reference here a little bit.
I'll tell you. So we talk about building up some tolerance, right? Building up some resilience. Some of the things that I'm a big fan of, is, believe it or not, I go back to some old school stuff from like Gary Gray. I'm a big fan of lunge matrix work. We talk about full body, upper and lower. So you're talking about doing like a lunge forward
Yeah,
into a curl and press, going into a 45-degree lunge into a curl and press, go into a lateral lunge into a curl and press, where
nice.
we're going to work all the way around kind of the clock, if you will, where
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get endurance in there. I'm going to get lower body. I'm going to get unilateral. I'm going to get different angles, all planes of motion. And similarities and variations of that are some of mine that I really am a big fan of. I think that I like to create exercises that are going to kind of tax the whole system. So I do a lot of different things off of that. We'll do step ups with, pressing and overhead and rotation and those types of things. So as I get into some of the more specialized stuff, those are the types of things that I'm a big fan of, creating chopping and lifting exercises with, like, say, drop step lunging and those types of things with our cable machines. Anything that is going to really like connect the top half to the bottom half and kind of force me to have to communicate and integrate force from the ground up is to me the stuff that I've found to work the best for myself and for people that I've trained for years. So that's mine. How about you?
Well, how many days a week are you doing that? And are you doing have a complementary base strength day as well, or are you doing
Right.
that twice a week, or what do you think?
Typically for me, that's one day out of a given week where we're going to do stuff that's going to be
Okay,
kind of
right
like
on. Yeah.
full body influenced. I'll typically going to have a day that will be a little bit more lower body centric with some rotation and trunk work. I'm going to have an upper body day that is going to be a little bit more focused on like structural integrity with my pushing and pulling and kind of like all those different variations that we talked about in the, specific intensities of, volumes and sets and reps and those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm usually going to have day 3 that is going to be more focused on force and power, kettlebell
Love it.
swings and
Love it. Love it.
squat thrusts and
Yeah.
maybe some hops and jumps and those types of things. And then
Yeah.
day 4 is like the culmination. It's going to be the full body stuff like I just talked about. And
Yeah.
that's how I typically like go about my week. It's lower body centric, upper body centric, a little bit of a power, or what I call like our dynamic day, followed
Yep.
by kind of a full body where it's like we're going to mix it all in together.
Yeah. Kind of a 4-day split, covering all the
Mm-hmm.
bases.
Yeah.
I love that split too. I a little bit similar to yours, um, where it's that multi-joint ground-based movement. Um, but I would probably, to me, just personally, is probably more of a targeted area. If it's going to be hips, um, I'm going to do some hip mobility, some hip strengthening, some lower lumbar stability type training. I might, I've got kind of a where I see the sweet spot personally in the core training. It's typically somewhere around 15, 16, 17 minutes of chop variations, holds, cable holds, plank variations, just on some stable and unstable surfaces as well. Probably very similar to what you do. I like
Yeah.
that for the core. I like the lunge variations a lot. And I like that big step, kind of that 18-inch plus. You got a big step. You've seen it. You start
Yeah.
crossing some canyons. There's going to be some full knee flexion, full hip flexion, loaded as well. And
Yeah.
I like to kind of have that. I like the mobility around the hips. I like the flexibility around the hips as well. A ton of
100%.
that. And then the upper body, I don't get too sport specific. I love to do, at the end when I get done shooting the bow, I'll pull it back 10 times and I'll pull it back with good form, drop that front shoulder and really kind of apply as much force as I can. And typically when I first start doing that, sometime in the early summer, I can do one set and I got a 70-pound bow. And when I get back to the truck, I just rip it back as far as I can, as fast as I can rather. And then I try to build up to 3 sets of 10 after I get done shooting. But I
Mm-hmm.
can I can see, after, I don't know, right now it's 30 or 40 arrows and my group starts spreading out. And I'm like, I gotta get stronger. I gotta build some strength. So I do it with the bow and I'll do it and try to hold.
Yeah.
I'll try to hold, it seems like 10 minutes, but I might be able to hold 30 seconds, 45 seconds, maybe a minute. And I
Yeah.
get better. I get better as the season comes around and
For
my
sure.
confidence go up and my groups come down in tightness. So I guess maybe a little different than you is I do a little, body segment targeted, even though we're doing very similar movements as well.
For sure. No, and I kind of do the same thing. I think as we get closer to season, I'm lucky that I can incorporate shooting into some of like workouts and things like that, where
Sweet.
we'll do a few different things, and then hey, I'm going to go and do some shots, and we've created a lot of similar stuff like that, where we'll build up to that point where I'm like, all right, we're going to go out. You got to give me a 30-second hold before we're going to let it rip, right?
Yep.
Do it under
Yep.
fatigue, right? Some of those things. I think there's a lot of value in that, and I love that stuff as well. So,
I've got a question for you though. And so I will not lift before I shoot.
yeah,
And there's days that it's like I'm gonna lift at home. I'm gonna do my little home routine as opposed to the full on gym routine because I want to have, especially come July and August in particular, I want to see tight groups, and I want to see tight groups out there ways too. But if I lift before, even the day of, and if I give myself 8 hours break, it's like, well, you've got about 10, 15 good arrows in you and you're done. And
yeah,
I find that a little bit frustrating. So as I come closer to the season, specifically bow season, elk in September, I built my strength up. I'm plenty strong in my upper body, but I'm not going to go fatigue my upper body until after I shoot. What's your thought?
Yeah. So I have like two schools of thought with that real quick. Number one is I try to separate my shooting in two different categories, right? Number one is if I'm really trying to work on shot process, accuracy, really trying to like dial in, I want to be fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And as we get, as I mentioned, kind of like closer to the season is where I'll start like mixing some of that in. So early on in the year, I don't do a whole lot of shooting at all under duress, fatigue, any of that type of stuff. And even as we get closer to the year, I want days where I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot completely fresh. But I start to sprinkle in shooting a little bit under fatigue as a way to start getting like more accustomed to maybe being a little bit more tired. Maybe,
But you're talking about just overall fatigue. Whatever you're going to do, an hour of rucking, hiking, running, whatever it is. I'm freaking tired,
yeah.
and then you go shoot is what you're suggesting, right?
Yeah. Or even during training.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So okay.
Where
I
I've
see
got
what you're
my
getting at.
bow out while I'm working out and I'm going to be
Right.
doing, let's just say I'm going to go through a 2 or 3 exercise cluster and then I'm going to go out and shoot 2 arrows. And then I'm going to
It's
come back
awesome.
in and then I'm going to do a 2 or 3 or 4 set cluster. And then I'm going to go
Nice.
shoot 2 arrows.
Yeah.
And I'll actually, one of our DIY program, I have some stuff in their program like that where I'm like, hey, start getting accustomed to that. And then I start specializing that even where I'm like, hey, you're going to shoot this one kneeling. You're going to shoot this one. You're going to draw and now a quarter turn and then shoot and start creating
Nice.
situations, scenarios where it's like, get away from, static standard shooting, always just completely
Yeah.
fresh. And so that's why I say, like, I think there's two of those. I definitely like to, as I'm working on trying to like shot process, focus on, all my things, my grip, my anchor, all these other things, right? Like settling, breathing and, breaking away and all these other things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? I want to be fresh for that as I start to try and like hone in on getting a little bit more on the precision side of things. And then, from there, yeah, as the season gets closer, I start kind of narrowing it down. But yeah,
But to your point, all integrated with hunting specific strength, focus, general strength, early
right,
spring into, okay, now I need to start getting a little bit more specific with your strength
right,
over the summer, a little bit more applied. Love
yep,
it.
for sure. So
Okay.
cool. Well, love it. I know we could probably talk 2 more hours. We're going to continue talking about some of this stuff. I have to transition on to my next hat here. And so, Mike, thank you. This was awesome. I think you and I can continue just piggybacking,
Yeah.
thought processes here. And we appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have questions, please put them in the comment section down below. If we talked about some things or mentioned some things that are in previous podcasts, go back and check some of those out and let us know what you think. If you have ideas or questions of things that you'd like to see us cover, please let us know. Obviously, we would love to have you like and subscribe to the page. And I look forward to the next one. I know we've got some special guests coming up. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag on. I'm excited about and appreciate your time as always, Mike, and look forward to the next episode.
My pleasure, Joel. Thank you.
All right, man. We'll talk soon.
See you, bud.
Bye.